This is the session Biosecurity from Policy to Implementation. And our first talk of the morning is from Stuart Burgess, thank you, from Moredon and EPIC. And the title of his talk is Co-Developed Solution for the Control of an Endemic Disease of Livestock, Coordinated Control of Sheep Scab on the Isle of Lewis and Harris. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction and the opportunity to come and talk to you all today about the work that we've been doing up on Lewis and Harris. Apologies, because I'm not going to know which of these two screens to point to, so you'll just have to bear with me. I'll try and do one each or something. We'll work something out. So this project's about controlling sheep scab on Lewis and Harris. Obviously, not everyone's fully aware of the disease, so I'll do a little introduction to the disease and then get into the more interesting work of what we've been doing on Lewis. So sheep scab is an infectious disease caused by infestation of the skin with this parasite, Psoroptes ovis. It's about a millimetre across. You can see some of the mites here. You will itch at the end of this talk, whether you like it or not. You will never see that many mites in one place again, and yeah, it's not a particularly nice view. What's less appetizing is what they then do to the sheep. So it causes an intense itching. It's a disease of inflammation, essentially, an allergic inflammation. And so it causes the sheep to itch, rub, scratch against anything that they can find. And usually that can be fence posts, it can be trees, barbed wire. And then, of course, they get secondary infections. What's kind of quite classic of sheep scab, and you can't really, I can't point because it will kill everything, but that animal in the background there, you can see it's just kind of arching its back, and it's just desperately trying to reach that intensely itching kind of spot. And, of course, it can't reach that spot. And so what it does is this lip-smacking behaviour, which is just, it's as we would if we were so upset about trying to reach something and couldn't reach it. And so that's quite characteristic of sheep scab as well. This is a picture by Neil Sargison at the Dick Vet, and it's one of the best I've ever seen because it captures everything about sheep scab. These are some animals that are infested with sheep scab. These are experimental animals. It's not a particularly pleasant thing to have to do, but it's the only way we can culture these parasites. We can't culture them in vitro. And again, they've been placed between the withers there, and that animal, again, is doing that lip smacking because it just cannot reach that site, and it is intensely, intensely itchy. So the disease is spread by direct contact, so one animal contacting another animal, the mites then moving across. But also, just to make things even more complicated, it's spread by fomites as well. So if an animal rubs up against a fence post, it leaves a little pluck of wool there with some mites on it. Another poor animal will come up again against that fence post. It's a lovely rubbing post. Unfortunately, it leaves with a dark passenger. And so that it's not a particularly pleasant disease, and it's hard to control because, of course, animals get moved around, and through markets, trailers, all of these are great ways of spreading sheep scab around. More complicated is the fact that there is a significant amount of subclinical sheep scab out there. So animals aren't necessarily showing signs of infestation, but are carrying the mites, and therefore they represent a risk to other animals as well. And people will quite innocently move infested animals around because they just don't know that they're infested at that particular time. And that comes about, this is a graph by Peter Bates, and what this shows, on the graph on the left there shows the lesion size. So as these mites infest, they cause lesions, which causes that intense itching. But you can see for about the first 3 weeks there, this is all in sort of 7-day blocks. So the first 3 weeks, there's no real lesion developing there. And mite numbers are on the graph on the right. And these were infested for about 10 mites. And by 3 weeks, you still have 10 mites. But then you get this exponential growth in lesion development and mite numbers. And it's the period leading up to that is a subclinical phase. There's no obvious signs of infestation. And in an experimental model, that's just 3 weeks. But in the field, that could take weeks, it could take months, it could be the next year before you see clinical signs. So it becomes a really difficult disease to manage if you're just relying on the presence of clinical signs alone. The parasite can live off the host for a number of days, 16 to 19 days, so that complicates control even further. And once it gets into a flock, it will spread very rapidly. We'd estimate by the time you see those clinical signs, 60 to 90% of that flock's infested. So it's usually too late by the time you see those signs. We eradicated sheep scab back in 1952. We reintroduced it from Ireland in 1972. We were very close to getting rid of sheep scab in the late 80s, early 90s. Unfortunately, we took our foot off of its throat and we deregulated in 1992, and since then it's become endemic. So now we have about 10 to 15% prevalence, 8 to 10,000 outbreaks a year. Costs are astronomical, somewhere between 80 and 200 million pounds per year. There are challenges to control. We rely heavily on just two methods of control, the macrocyclic lactone injectables and organophosphate dips, neither of which are perfect. No new drugs on the horizon at the moment. There are a lot of farmers out there that just do routine whole flock treatments. In many cases, those aren't necessary. Of course, we're using those drugs unnecessarily, and often they're ineffective unless you're in a high-risk scenario. For example, if you use common grazing, where your risk of getting scab is about 10-fold higher. Non-validated means of control, the use of organophosphates through showers and jetters is not only incredibly stupid, it's also ineffective. So bad practice. And yeah, I shout about this a lot. But there are some things in our favour. So scab is focused in hotspots, and you'll notice some hotspots here. So English-Welsh border region, Wales, the southwest, the north of England, southwest and north east of Scotland. Lewis and Harris I'll come on to in a moment. It's obviously glowing in red. That is not necessarily a reflection of the degree of sheep scab there. I'll come on to that in a minute. Coordinated control is absolutely crucial to controlling this disease. What we're doing has not worked and is not working, so we need to change that. There is a threat of resistance to those injectables. We reported it back in 2018, and there's now clear evidence of spread of those resistant populations across the UK. This was the first sort of lack of efficacy reports that we saw around the English-Welsh border region. When we look at the high confidence lack of efficacy reports, we can see that those are spreading across all of the UK. And we now have confirmed resistant mites in Northern Ireland as well. So that is a continuing problem and one we need to take into account when we're doing our treatments. One good thing, which we showed earlier this year, is that the ML-resistant mites can still be controlled with an organophosphate. So that's in our favour. We still have that to fall back on. But these mites will develop resistance to organophosphate given time and opportunity. Showering, jetting is a very good opportunity to develop resistance. So I talked about subclinical scab. So this just shows some really early signs of disease. So you can just see on these lambs, there's just little areas of discoloration where they've just been nibbling. No wool loss, no real irritation, but just every now and again, a little kind of reach around and a nibble to the fleece. And if you zoom in a little bit, you can see those a little bit more clearly there. And then if we zoom in further and cut the fleece back, you'll see in the centre there a lesion. That's about the size of a 50p coin, probably about 50 to 100 mites in there, and clearly an infestation starting. The animal with the orange dot, though, click back, there's no mites there. There's no mites anywhere on that animal, but it's positive by our blood test, which I'll come on to in a little while. So it's clearly infested, but it's not showing any signs of infestation at this stage beyond that little area of discoloration. So really, really subtle signs, which means it's really difficult to spot. So if you're diagnosing it in the field, so the U on the left there, it looks pretty bad. So you'd have a fair chance of going in, taking a skin scrape sample, which is the sort of gold standard of diagnosing scab, and then hopefully you'd see this under the microscope, not life size. However, that method, because if you don't see a lesion, where do you take a skin scraping from? And we've shown that even in infested animals, finding that lesion can be really, really difficult. So where do you get a skin scrape from? And it's because of that method has a sensitivity that can be as low as 1 in 5. That's much, much worse than a coin toss. So, and so it's that reason that Mordun developed a blood test with funding from DEFRA and then more latterly from the Scottish Government. And that blood test is pretty good. It's actually improved a bit further on this. We're now at about 99% each for sensitivity and specificity. So we keep improving the test. It picks up the disease before you see those subclinical signs, which are really, really important. It's a flock test, though, so you have to test 12 animals, a minimum of 12 animals from any group or flock. It's been available since 2017, and it works well. So we're quite pleased about it. But it is a game changer because it means we can now find scab before it has that chance to spread from farm to farm. We've never had that opportunity before. And so it's been used, it's available through a number of different testing centres. SIUC are hoping to offer it quite soon. And it's also available through the Scottish Government's Preparing for Sustainable Farming programme as well. So farmers can actually get this test funded as well, which is really good. The test works, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. The mites deposit fecal pellets. They contain all of the allergens that trigger the inflammatory reaction. The host develops, the sheep develops antibodies against those. We pick up those antibodies. That's great, but those antibodies stay in circulation for 3 to 6 months after treatment, which does complicate things, but as it does with any antibody test. So it tells us the animal's been exposed to the mite, but it doesn't distinguish between one that's infested and one that's been recently treated. So we have to have information about recent history of disease and also recent treatments when we're interpreting. There's an obvious reason to test 12 animals. This is work done by BIOS. And really it is about, kind of finding that balance between testing one animal and having very little chance of picking it up, or testing all of the animals and spending lots of money. And the magic number seems to be about 12, which gives us a 95% accuracy of picking up sheep scab should it be in that flock. So testing advice is to assume everything coming onto your property, everything you bought in, should be a risk. That's a no-brainer when it comes to kind of biosecurity. Tups are a particularly high risk of bringing in sheep scab. Keep the animals separate for 2 weeks. The reason for 2 weeks is it takes 2 weeks for those animals, once they've been infested, to seroconvert. And so that's really, really important. So you have to give them 2 weeks in case they picked it up en route to your farm, which they could easily do at a market or in a trailer. And then you can test them. If it's negative, you don't have to use a treatment unnecessarily. You've saved yourself quite a lot of money, because it's not just a disease where you treat the individual, you have to treat the whole flock. So it's very costly to do that. And if it's positive, well, at least you know what you're treating. You can use the right treatment at the right time. And that's really important, because this test doesn't cross-react with lice, and that can often be misdiagnosed as sheep scab. So it gives you that definitive diagnosis as well. So we've been, I'll zoom through this, but we've been tackling sheep scab across all 4 nations. We have programmes running in England, in Wales, Northern Ireland, and in Scotland. I'm going to focus today very much on Lewis and Harris. So there are some reasons why we should control sheep scab now. The first is that we only have these 2 treatments, nothing else on the horizon. So this is all we have. It's a great time because we've got wonderful industry support, particularly in Scotland with the Industry Working Group, which is a fantastic mechanism. The injectables, those mLs, they still work. But we have to use them carefully. We have the OP dips as long as we don't use showers or jetters. And we have that blood test, which allows us to coordinate our control. And maybe ultimately we can look at some kind of premium for demonstrating disease-free status. For example, the Shetland Isles is sheep scab free. So we can look at, trying to gain some premium for that, but even if that's a high welfare premium. Mordun is also working on a sheep scab vaccine. We have a vaccine, it works. It's not a sterile immunity, it's about 80% efficacy, but it's as good as we're probably going to get with that vaccine at the moment. So it's trying to find a route to market for that. And in the meantime, we use the test and we try and coordinate control efforts. So Lewis and Harris, you'll see, is glowing in red up there. This map doesn't necessarily show outbreaks, it shows the risk of sheep scab. And Lewis and Harris are particularly high risk of scab because they have a lot of common grazing, lots of contiguous properties, and lots of animal movement. So without support, it'd be very difficult for them to actually control scab by themselves. And that's why we're very lucky in getting funding from Scottish Government to take this project forwards and working with all of the stakeholders on Lewis and Harris to do so. So we're working with the Sheep Producers Association, the local vet, and we have local coordinators on the ground, which is absolutely critical to getting people to buy into the project. At scanning back in February, we blood tested 105 flocks, that's 12 animals from each flock, and looked to see what the extent of scab is. It's quite a nice setup because the scanner comes over to Lewis and Harris. He scans sheep across the whole island, so you get a really, really good survey of where disease might be. So this is them, this Hector, that's the vet on the right, the top right there, bleeding some sheep. And you can see the FANC systems that they have. Most of the townships will have these FANC systems, and they can gather the sheep in those and then work collectively. This is a great thing about Lewis and Harris. They are used to working collectively. So it's actually it's quite an easy kind of task for us to get them to do that. We found some positives, clinical positives, where we had definite mites present, and also 17 that were positive by the blood test alone. Most of those, when you spoke to the farmer, actually had become apparent by the time we'd got back in touch with them post-testing. They're in 4 clusters, and this is where they are. So Stornoway, Ewig on the west, Ballallen, and then down on West Harris as well. So these are our main clusters of disease. We notified all of these via APHA. The crofters are very happy to do that, which is great. And we now have this lovely red flag over Lewis and Harris, but it shows the system of notification is actually working in Scotland. Treatments with injectables, because this was 2 weeks before lambing, so we didn't have the option of doing any dipping. But we followed that up at the summer gather by doing further blood testing to make sure that those treatments were efficacious. And now we are plunge dipping potentially every sheep on Lewis and Harris. So we have a mobile contractor going over. He left about 10:30 last night to go home after a very, very long week. So that's what we're doing now. So we did the follow-up blood testing. We did have one treatment failure. It was not resistance. It was a poor application. In spite of us trying to train people to do that, these things do happen. But we've now followed that one up, and we've dipped those animals as well. We're using a mobile dipping contractor to go up and do it. We're not doing that, which, you'll be surprised at how much of that did go on in the past. We're doing this, and this is what we call it's like a deep fat fryer. Basically, the sheep go into a cage, and they get plunged into the tank. And the great thing about that is you can control the time, and it's critical that animals get a full minute in that dip tank and that their heads are plunged under twice. It's not a pleasant experience, but that ensures that it's efficacious. And these automate that entire process. So there's not a temptation to rush the treatment. And so most of the good operators will work very, very effectively. We had initially thought we'd focus on the areas where we'd spotted disease initially through the blood testing, but actually the uptake has been phenomenal. We've been really kind of like set back by how much engagement we've had with the crofters. So some already dip, so it's not alien for them to do dipping. We've had huge interest. So we're planning somewhere between 25 and 30,000 sheep to get dipped. I think the total flock size there is about 30,000, so we are not a million miles off of that. It's a really, really good uptake. Flock sizes are small, so this is not a small undertaking. This involves about 400 or 500 individual crofts and farms. Some of them have 6 sheep, some will have 1,000 sheep. So the logistics of this is incredibly, incredibly challenging, and I am not a logistical expert by any means. So we've also provided support for gathering to make sure we get every animal off of the moors, and that again is another challenge. This is the dipping. So this is them. We have a mobile handling system. This is not in a fank. This is in the middle of nowhere. There are a set of sheep that we needed to get dipped. We've set up that system, and then the sheep come off, and they are now scab-free and hopefully protected for at least another 8 weeks, a minimum of 8 weeks after that. But the logistics around that are incredible. And then what we're then going to do is obviously having hopefully controlled scab, keep it out. So we're offering free treatments and testing for tups that people are buying to bring on, and also overwintering animals as well. So having done the hard work, we then want to keep it out. So the future, look at developing quarantine and health plans for the crofters. Further testing support, we'll continue to offer the test to the crofters out there. Potentially looking at getting their own mobile dipping trailers out there. There are some wonderful systems like this that you can buy. They're not that expensive, around about £20,000. And that gives them the ability to do that dipping themselves, rather than relying on us trying to get a mobile contractor on a ferry over to the island, which is it's not cheap to do that. And then long term, do we look at a Shetland or Orkney type system, whereby we have greater control over the animal movements coming onto the islands? And I think longer term, that is where we want to be moving towards. That's me. So thank you very much for your attention. I just want to say huge thank you to all of the crofters, the Sheep Producers Association, and also you'll see from the talks that are coming up, Scottish Government and also all of our collaborators from SRUC and from the James Hutton and from BIOS. So it's a massive sort of team effort to try and get to this point. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. We have time for a couple of questions. So anyone's there?
Thank you very much. Gosia Siwania from Welsh Government. So I'm interested in that keeping out section, the last slide that you had. And basically, I know that at this stage, when the sheep scab is active, you've got huge engagement. But then if disease is eradicated, that keeping out action needs some kind of, I don't know, stimulation, etc.
Yep.
So it's not coming again. Do you think, is there a role for legislation then to put in place, or do you think that industry is able to do it without the legislation in place?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and one that differs depending on which part of the country we're talking about. So in Scotland, I don't think we need more legislation, not in Scotland. I mean, the disease is already notifiable here. So I think we have all of the tools that we need to control it. What we need is to get everybody on board. And you're entirely right. This is the easy time to get people on board because there's a problem. We've demonstrated it to them. They knew there was a problem, but you know that it wasn't big enough a problem for them to deal with it themselves. And the challenges there were, you know, enormous. So that's the easy part. It's the legacy. That's the really important part. And I think that what you can't do is just have it on sheep scab. You have to broaden it out, and you'll see from Claire's talk later, you know, that we are trying to broaden that out to just biosecurity in general. This is an exemplar of that, but just focusing on one disease, because as you say, when that disease starts to go down, attention goes elsewhere. So you have to change the whole ethos around biosecurity, and I think that's our long-term aim. So yeah. Yeah, Shetland have got a really good system. So initially they were relying on using the injectables to treat. So every animal that came onto Shetland had to get an injection with the macrocyclic lactones. They had a breakdown, whether it was misapplication of the injection, whether it was resistant mice. I think it was just misapplication, probably. So they had a breakdown last year, 2022. They've taken care of that. We did a lot of blood testing with them to control that. And I think that they are now back to being sheep scab free. What they've done is they have brought in a mobile dipper now, or not a mobile dipper, a fixed dipper at the port. And so every animal that comes on now they all have to be dipped. And because the bylaw says they have to be injected, they get injected as well. So they're getting a double whammy, basically. But that's what they're doing to control it. And I think you could look at those sorts of systems. Shetland has maybe a bit more control over that, though, and fewer movements. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much again. So, the next speaker is Claire Hardy from the James Hutton Institute and EPIC as well. And the title of her talk is Understanding the Barriers to Uptake of Biosecurity Measures on the Island of Lewis and Harris, focusing on sheep scab and rundown control.
Is this you?
I forgot my poem.
Oh, do you want to speak about your poem?
I got ChatGPT to reinterpret the first report to Scottish Government in the style of Robert Burns. I think it's just, yeah, it's scary. It's really scary. So I did one in the style of Donald Trump as well, which is entertaining but much less informative. Sorry, I forgot about that.
Oh, I was just a bit worried. I was like, really? You want me to speak about this? No, you're fine. Yeah, okay, so I've already been introduced, so you know what I'm going to be speaking about. We've already talked about the workshops. There's a poster downstairs if you're really interested that Carol's put together, so go and visit that. We did 5 workshops over 5 days. We engaged with about 35 stakeholders, and we've reported about the workshops. But to take it on, we went and did some interviews, and we've got a lot more in-depth data, and that's really what I want to speak about today. Just to acknowledge the team, so it's myself and Carol and Orla and Neve, and then in Morden, Dave and Stu have been helping us a lot, so just to acknowledge everybody. So this is really what I'm going to be speaking about. I've put up a map of Lewis and Harris. The dots indicate the different holdings of the people that we were talking to. Obviously, GDPR, we don't want to identify them, so the dots are quite big, so that you can't go and find them. But just so you get an idea of how much coverage we got, the dots are their holdings. They're not necessarily where they live. So that's something that's important. Yeah, so one of the things that we asked them in the workshops was we asked them, what does biodiversity mean to you? And we were actually really surprised about what we were hearing back. There's quite a big disconnect. The way I've set up my slides, I've got quotes down one side, I've got text down the other. I'm not going to read out all the quotes. These are just interesting, so whilst I'm rabbiting on, if you want to read the quotes, I'll read some of them, but if you want to read the quotes, they're there. We were asking them, what does biosecurity mean to you? We were really surprised. In a lot of cases, it doesn't mean that much, but when you actually ask them about their practices, they do have good practices, but they don't. There's this big disconnect between the word biosecurity and what they actually do. So we were asking them quite a lot about that. They carry out the practices. Their main concept is to just keep their flocks safe. That's really what they're really interested in. So some of the things that we're now looking at, do we need better messaging? Does it need to be around biosecurity? Do we need to tell them more about biosecurity, or do we make a change and maybe move towards talking about disease control? And that's something that we still need to discuss. So when we were talking to them, they talk a lot about working individually. Some of the townships do work well together, and they come together. That's great. A few of the crofters mentioned working as a whole community. Some of them have this idea that we've got a closed flock, and between us all, and they're decent crofters, and they've treated and they're drenched, and we're looking after it as a closed flock between us all. So some of them are trying to work together, and because they use these common grazings, that's really important for them. The ones that work alone, they are a problem because you don't know when they've dosed, who they've dosed, but they're still accessing the common grazing. They do have rules and regulations. Yeah. So we were asking them about what measures they use, and really the measures they use are what maybe the industry would not consider to be gold standard. They are best fit for them, so they very much try and do what practically they can do. So what we've been trying to do is put together a decision support tool that looks at the costs and benefits of the different measures that they could be using. And we're going to take that, we go back to them and work with them and see, have we covered all the measures? What could they implement more? Could they implement different things? And the DigiFlock game, which I'll talk about later, it helps them because it's got the different scenarios that they could be looking at. I just put this one up, some pictures of the crofts. So you see they're really small strips. That's a big problem for them when it comes to the fencing, because it's considered that they need double fencing. But if their croft land is 50 metres and there's 3 metres between each fence, they lose so much land, and also it's just so expensive for them. So really what they're considering is repairing fences, maybe putting in a single fence, but that means that the animals still have nose-to-nose contact, and as Stu told you, if there's a piece of wool hanging on the fence, that's a big problem. So they actually consider their fences to be stock management rather than biosecurity. They work a lot on trust. They really have this idea that they have to trust everyone is controlling the disease. They have to trust that they're keeping the flocks disease-free and healthy. The trust that they need is when they're buying in animals, they have to trust these animals are coming disease-free. And they're saying, we don't have any rules. No, we just have to trust each other. We have to trust that we don't buy in questionable animals. And this is a really big thing for them. They need to work together and have this trust that everybody's working with a common goal. Some of the really big challenges we saw was the common grazing. Most of them use the common grazing. They put their animals onto there. And this is a weakness, really, because that's where they all mix together. Stu told you about the problems with gathering. If they're going to gather to dip, they need to make sure that they've gathered everything. They have less people on the islands, less people that are available to do the gathers. Animals get left behind. These feral animals are sources of disease. So that's a big problem. It's a big challenge. Overwintering is a problem. They tend to breed their own replacements. So that means that they don't have enough land to be able to overwinter them. So they send their hogs to overwintering farms on the Black Isle. And it's these animals coming back. How do they manage those animals? So they need to kind of consider that. Wild animals is also a problem. They feel that they're being raided by the deer at the moment. There are too many deer. They've not been controlled. The other problem for biosecurity is that we're being raided by increasing and unprecedented numbers of deer. So they feel that they're under attack by them. They're very worried about wild animal control because they don't have enough ways of controlling, because it's sea eagles, they can't do anything there. There's deer, they have problems doing the shoots. There's problems with geese. Geese is a big problem for them. They do have a group that shoot the geese. The group that shoot the geese think they're very effective. Some of the crofters, they don't believe that they're very effective at all. So we've been using sheep scab to talk to them about their biosecurity. As Stu was saying, yes, we need to get them to increase their biosecurity measures, and we're using sheep scab, roundworms as well, because we need them to increase their biosecurity measures, the ones they implement, and this is a focus at the moment. There was a bit of a belief that they didn't really have sheep scab. Stu's gone out there and proved that they do have, so now it's not an if. They actually have to start implementing some of the measures. Some of the quotes there are quite important. Some of them do believe that although sheep scab is notifiable, there's still a kind of a stigma about whether you're the one that's brought it into the area. So this is them talking. I think there might be a certain amount of embarrassment or, fear of being chastised by the community if you've had it. It's like having nits or something, You don't want to admit that it's you. This is them talking. We also asked them about roundworm control. One of the problems with roundworm control, and I know Dave is very frustrated about this, that they're still not really sure what control to use. And they're saying that actually it's more of a grey area than sheep scab, because sheep scab, they can see them scratching and they know that they need to do something and it's clear they need to dip. But with roundworm, they're really not really sure. So there's quite a big kind of divide. So I'm only going by symptoms. If they're scouring, I'm assuming they've got something and they're dosing, compared to some of them realise that there's resistance out there and they shouldn't just be dosing. They are aware of SCOPs, but they're still a bit confused. They are also very open to getting some more advice and some training. This is something that they've said to us. So one thing we asked them is about being a crofter. Why are they a crofter? The future in it. And their answers were that it's a traditional way of life. The top quote is a really nice one. I got a huge feeling of uplift, of well-being, of being at home with nature, and it's impossible to describe. You're at one with nature most of the time until something goes wrong, but most of the time you are, and it's refreshing. So it's not just their job, it's their way of life, it's their culture, their tradition. It's a very social thing. It's a very remote place that they're living in. A lot of them speak Gaelic, and they were telling us that they use it as an opportunity to get together on a Saturday, and they all kind of turn up, and they're at the Fanks, and they're working together, they're speaking Gaelic, and it's a social thing as well. So I talked to another guy who's actually from the northeast coast of Scotland, so he doesn't speak Gaelic, and he has been kind of accepted on the island. And he says he goes in, and they're all speaking Gaelic, they see him, and they just change. It's fine, they don't mind. But it's tradition, culture, and it's something that they don't really want to die out. Yeah, so the way that the subsidies used to work, they used to get paid per head of sheep, and that changed. So you see an awful lot less sheep there, and they recognise that it is changing. The flocks are less hefted to the different areas, and that's resulted in them, they roam much further than they used to, which makes the gathering very difficult, makes them, they mix a lot more. And the numbers game doesn't add up. There's less sheep, there's less people trying to gather them together. So these are all things that they have problems with. Succession is something that's being addressed. Some of them have family that want to take over, that's great. Some of them don't have family, but then they're trying to encourage younger people to take over the crofting. And when they're beginning to run shearing courses and competitions, they're finding more youngsters are coming along. So that's really, really kind of positive for them. So yeah, the next steps, they now know whether they have what their disease status is. Stu's wrong them and told them. We now want to go back, and we're planning to run more workshops in November, and we want to talk to them about, has this changed their perception of disease? Has it changed what measures they want to implement? And then we'll also be doing some more interviews to get that kind of those quotes, those really rich data for us. We're going to take those cost-benefit tables and ask them to help us with that. We're going to be introducing them to the DigiFlock. And the other thing that we're doing is, as I was saying to Lucy, we've produced a Shetland virtual tour so that they can see what island control looks like. We don't think that they'll be able to replicate it. There's too many ports, so they can't have this single point of entry. But we intend taking a group of stakeholders from Lewis and Harris to Shetland, meeting up with the people there. They can see what they do and see what aspects of that could work out on Lewis and Harris. And that's me. Thank you.
Hi. Great presentation, very interesting. Any questions from the public? Lucy, the microphone is arriving.
Thank you. It's a really interesting talk. I'm Lucy Gilbert from the University of Glasgow. I was really fascinated, but the crofters think that the wildlife is impacting on biosecurity, especially the deer. Do you know what the actual ecological or epidemiological risk from deer is? I mean, they carry ticks. Do they carry the mites, or do they carry worms?
No. Worms potentially, yes, but certainly not the scab mites.
Mm-hmm.
I think the big thing with deer is most definitely the ticks. So that's their concern. There's a huge number of ticks out there. I think that there are as the nature of crofting changes, as those kind of the sheep hefting system is changing as well, and then the incursion of deer closer and closer to, for example, to gardens and Stornoway, then I think that becomes more apparent. So whether it is an actual risk or it's making things worse, I don't know. Perception is there.
Yeah, and is there anything is there anything the local estates are doing about the deer in response to this fear?
Little. One or two of the estates are actually community owned, so they have more control. But the ones that aren't community owned, that's obviously much more difficult for them to have an influence on their practices as well.
Yeah, because this has been a huge issue in the US,
Yes.
and the local US community owned estate is now sort of promising to reduce deer numbers. Yeah, because of ticks as well, ticks and Lyme disease, yeah. Yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, other questions? Okay, I actually have one. Yeah. So what happens when the sheep become feral? So do they try to recapture it, or they just consider it lost? And I don't know. I find it very fascinating.
Yeah, so there are feral sheep there. They haven't managed to capture them. Sometimes they do get them like 2 or 3 years later, and they've got these enormous big coats on them. They've talked about this. Sometimes they don't have tags in them. If they've got tags there, it's easier to trace their owners. I wouldn't like to comment on their final decisions as to how they treat these feral sheep.
Okay.
I'm diplomatic. I've got to go back.
Understandably. Well, thank you very much again. So the next presenter is Estevão Simões from the Scottish Government, and his talk is Policy Aspect of Sheep Scab. So, please.
Thank you very much. Do I use the green button and red to go back? Excellent. Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks for being here. I can read my slides there. So I'll start with a bit of history. Oh, thank you. There's a bit of history on this talk as well. And I don't know if you can read, but just to make the point that sheep scab has been one of the first diseases to ever been considered to be due for control. And here's King Harold the Good of Wales. Wales, shout out to Wales there. And I know Stuart mentioned in his presentation a little bit about the history. I'll talk a little bit more, I think, just to give you an impression of how things moved on and what kind of things affected the evolution of sheep scab in Great Britain and UK. So it was actually first made notifiable in 1869, but there were very few controls. A few years later, the local authorities were required to employ vets, but it's actually backfired. That's why I'm color coding these, because people felt less keen on reporting. And then DIPs came start of the century, following industry support. And this is quite key. Double dipping introduced in 1920. And in 1923, it was penalties were introduced for selling affected sheep, which actually backfired because we're starting to create a bit of probably stigma in people, and you don't want to tell people that you got sheep scab. So I don't want you to analyze this in detail. Just say it's a snapshot of 100 years between 1870s and 1970s, and how the effect. It would be very interesting to look in detail, but it's from the Animal Health Centenary Ministry book of Animal Health. That's really interesting. A bit more recently, Stuart mentioned, but actually before the 1970s and the eradication, in 1928 there was the first proper order with full-blown controls. It really made a big difference. You might have noticed in the graph the depression in numbers. And then we got Scotland and GV eradication complete, and the return has always been mentioned. And I'll talk a little bit about the resurgence. So this has been, despite lots of efforts, still disease was progressing, and it led to deregulation, as was mentioned. And this was analyzed by some well-esteemed colleagues, and here are the main reasons. So variable degrees of non-compliance, the logistics of gathering sheep, we just had some examples about that, the total lack of a reliable ID and tracing system. We all know that's absolutely essential for traceability and disease control. Treatments weren't always good, and maybe a particular feature of UK farming in sheep and in cattle as well is the dealer networks, where you have markets and sheep moving all over the place. It's a reality we have to consider in policy, and also some opposition and industry drive behind measures is very important, as I'll talk a little bit more about later. People just didn't like also some of the notifiable disease procedures, and starting to have concerns over the OP dips and general health, environment, and so on. So policy didn't work. Now, fast forward a bit, I'm not going to dwell on the last 20 years, but except on some key pivotal moments of the sheep scab working group that was probably triggered by the Scottish government-funded research by ADAS, a review of the evidence, what works and what doesn't. The sheep scab industry working group has been absolutely instrumental, like Stuart said. What I want to say is that it's a success story, and it shows that everyone has a responsibility, and we cannot really do these things by ourselves in government or just the drive of certain parts of the country or certain individuals. And just to note a few key successes was the sheep scab order. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. The new diagnostic tests, Stuart here from Morden has mentioned that, and is the sheep scab pilot. And there's other initiatives, just a very short list. But the key thing about the working group is the backing for all these initiatives. So the impact of the 2010 order, which basically made sheep scab notifiable again, has been assessed. Again, esteemed colleagues mentioned, probably too small in this snippet of the paper. And it facilitated the notification of sheep scab in Scotland, and really allowed industry and government to identify potentially previously unidentified potentially free areas, as well as recurring incidents on sheep farms, and really start to understand the dispersion of the disease. Still, concerns about lack of engagement that kind of permeated through things that Stuart said, things that were said in the previous presentation, and this is why the role of others supporting government is essential, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So just, I'm not going to dwell much on the project here. Stuart mentioned it enough, but just to say it will really have a direct impact on animal health and welfare in Lewis and Harris, and crucially help us learn lessons for the future, and how can you apply what we learned in future policy. And again, showcases the kind of collaborative approach, and Stuart said it himself, there's so many people involved in order. It is not just a drive of one person. It's all these people that they give up expertise, give up their time, and work together to reach a common goal. Because this is the EPIC conference, I'll talk about what we think the role of our partners in academia is, and for example, EPIC has given us excellent research papers. Just talked about that. I'm not going to go too much more on that. I cannot stop. I cannot not mention Morden, of course, and we have the development of the test, vaccine, and future work. There's the two key papers for sheep scab control. This was one, really understanding the role of movements and inform future sheep scab control activities. And I think some key things from this work was how we can use the available tools to make this analysis, and identify areas of the country that could be used as a means of assessing the results of, for example, in Lewis and Harris as a follow-up, and developing a model that, or a code actually, that could be reapplied in the future. This is the paper that's just been talked about in the previous presentation. Again, very, very useful for us in policy to try to understand how to tailor communications, a lot of that, tailor guidance, and also how to tailor any policy measures that we implement, and not just that, also to understand the realities of the culture and the ways of living in such communities, which are essential, that government here in our ivory tower understands and nourishes in a way in how we implement policy. So moving on, so this is sort of summary slide. I'd like to highlight in particular the leadership and the innovation, because although I'm a veterinarian, there's a lot of people that are a lot more expert in completely different areas, in specific areas, and we need that leadership to help us drive where funding should be, which areas should we promote, and so on. So and ultimately, academia as a whole, and the academia we have in Scotland is a very valuable asset, and I'm sure this is true across the UK. And not just that, we value also the collaboration between academic. It's all about building networks of collaboration, resilience, and sharing knowledge. And of course, we have people here from other parts of the UK who will be interested in think about what we're doing in Scotland, and in the same way that we learn from other sides, people from other sides learn from us, of course. So how does this align? So this is not us in policy. We want to improve animal health and welfare. It's a horrible disease for welfare. It doesn't get often mentioned. We want to promote, our minister's got a responsibility to promote a viable, sustainable, and healthy industry. And is this not just a good story to tell, because it sounds almost selfish in a way, but because it is the way of moving things forward. So we have eradicated sheep's scab before it came back. Now it's difficult, but we have more tools, and what we need is the drive from various people working together, I think. We mentioned resistance. Of course, it's another issue. It's not just in antibiotics, also in antimicrobials, of course. And every time I get asked, should we support a research paper or an initiative or something like that, I always say, even if I don't understand it very well, I will say this unquantifiable benefit of experts working together to build that resilience and creating networks and relationships and sharing of knowledge and so on. So all that's unquantifiable, but aside from direct policy application of academic approaches, we have this additional benefit. So I'm not going to say we have a policy just here. Some policy colleagues are here, but I think what I want to highlight with this next slide, there's lots of thinking when you're in our shoes, and what could we do next? And what we could do next will certainly be informed by all these initiatives that are going on, all this expertise that is in the room and outside this room. So how will we work the lessons from the Lewis and Harris project? Are we going to work in we'll use geography? We had a chat with Stu about this, and how can we? It's a lot about how we can engage people and get them to use their own drive, and to consider how our comms, our guidance, and our regulations potentially. I'm not saying yes or no. It's just that there's a lot of things that we need to think about. I need to plug in, and it was mentioned, thank you as well, the existing grants, actually 12 £150, and it's been used in the Glen Sheep's Cab initiative. It's very easy. I have a couple of slides at the end, but I'll speak about when I get to them. Thank you. Again, other things we could consider: enhanced role of industry, plug into the future sustainable farming scheme, and coordination with other nations, because diseases, as you know, don't respect borders. And what's our objective? Eradication or control? We have to live with it. Can we maintain a free area once we achieved it, and so on? I think definitely we need to go for eradication, because it can be done. And again, how we embed new tools in the control of sheep's scab, and how all this, including further research, feeds into arrive at a balanced policy that captures the views and expertise of so many different sectors of academia, industry, our field services, and other areas of policy. So thanks for that. I'll just plug in the grant which is being used, just so it'd be very good if this can be promoted. And all you need is to go to the Rural Payments webpage and get more information about it. And just a little comment on future animal health and welfare funding through the Sustainable Farming Scheme is still to be decided, but we very much hope so it will be included. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. So, question? Come on, don't be shy. Oh, we have two.
Roger Humphrey, SRUC. What's happening in other countries with sheep's scab?
I have to be honest, I don't know very well. But you asked the question, do you want to share experiences, or?
No, I was just thinking that as well as learning from trials such as on Lewis and Harris,
Yeah.
there may be some good lessons that come from international experience.
Yeah, so I was assuming you mean international, outside the UK. I think it's something that is definitely considered, and it should be researched. But me personally, I'm just.
I could just have a comment on that one. So probably less so with sheep scab, largely because it's not present in some of the big sheep producing countries like Australia or New Zealand. So it doesn't factor into those very, very large producers. But it is obviously endemic in a huge number of countries. It's notifiable in South Africa, for example. But again, it's trying to get traction. I think actually we're leading in the UK on this, which is a really big positive. And actually, when we go back, Scotland has actually been the real lead for this. I was really intrigued to see that Scotland actually eradicated it just before it was eradicated at the GB level. So, I think we're kind of replicating that as well. And it's great to see us leading on this, but the other nations aren't equally, kind of stepping up to the mark. So, but yeah, internationally, less to learn, more, I guess, to teach, I'm hoping.
So there was a question from George.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about, George Russell from Morden. I wanted to ask about timescales. So Lewis and Harris and potentially Shetland may well be scab-free at the moment. What is Scottish Government going to do to support and extend that and then move towards controls? Because obviously putting anything into legislation takes a long time.
Yes, and the answer is whether we will or not, whether legislation will be or not be the right answer. But I think the importance, and it is not just me saying it here, it's the need to have everybody on board. We need to, in order to take the next steps, we want to learn all these lessons from the ongoing projects, sit down and be informed by our governance mechanisms, for example, the Sheep Scab Working Group. And so in terms, I cannot say whether we will or not will not do legislation, but it's certainly one of the options that gets considered, certainly as we see these new methods. For example, the test is an obvious candidate for pre-movement test. Should we do that or not? Once we get to that stage, then we think, what's the impact of doing that? And we have to make decisions on balance, so I can't say yes or no. But yes, legislation does take time, require consultation, and that's all part of the process. So it's certainly something we don't want to let gains go away, so that I can say. Sorry, it's a woolly answer, but that's the reality.
Okay, we have another question. Sorry, thank you.
It's Tasha Geddy from Marine Directorate. I just had a query in relation to Australia and New Zealand and their sheep scab freedom and how they managed to maintain that. Is that all based on border controls?
Yeah.
Underpinned by...
They did have sheep scab, kind of back in sort of the 1890s. They managed to kind of control it, but they essentially, they used some awful chemicals back then because they could. Anything they couldn't, they just killed. So they used some pretty brutal kind of methods back then to get rid of scab, and then their quarantine is so strong now that there's very little chance of it coming back, I think now. So yeah. But they had the option of using chemicals that we couldn't use. We simply couldn't use anyway.
Okay.
Okay, sorry, the long way around. I'm Philip Skuse from Morden / Epic / Safari. It's a slightly unfair question. There's an obvious animal health and welfare aspect to sheep scab. I'm just wondering, is there a climate change mitigation aspect as well in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and how would you quantify that?
Oh, absolutely. So I think the line that we take, it's not the primary objective of what we do in my division, but we're well connected. In this, what I said about working with industry, academia, externals, and so on, applies with the different policy areas of the Scottish government. So, and the way it works is it's built into our ministerial decision-making governance. So we'll have to consult on those aspects. And actually, in terms of getting funding for things, we really have to demonstrate those benefits. And it's to be honest, a lot of these things are quite. I think I feel it's straightforward because better efficiency, less losses. You got less better animal health equals better, more efficient production, less emissions per resources spent. So whether the trick is quantifying that, and that's what difficulty we have with this project and a number of other projects. It's really need that data that helps us persuade the decision makers. So that's a role for you guys in Modern, in Epic, and everywhere else.
Okay, thank you again.
Thank you.
So for the last talk of the session, Claire is coming back to give us a demonstration of the DigiCraft, a serious game for exploring biosecurity.
Yeah.
Present.
really sorry that you've got to listen to me again. I've plugged in my computer so that I can show you a few things, and one of the first things that we'd like to show you is that we had breaking news yesterday, and I'm going to invite Stu to come and just talk about these.
Sorry.
Come on, we're going to do a Hatton Morden collaboration here, live.
Exactly. I guess one of the main things to show is obviously we dipped 18,500 sheep, which is remarkable. But just to show you the amount of complexity of logistics. So obviously in the foreground there you can see the mobile dipping lorry. Oh, thank you. What a wonderful assistant. And then you've got the FANC system there as well. Thank you. And obviously, so we have to get the sheep there. The sheep have to get there the day before because they're getting gathered from various kind of hills around there. Just to make it more efficient, we use the trailers to bring sheep in from more distant locations. And then on the left there, you'll see the IBCs. So these are the large kind of, sort of containers that we're using. So those are filled up the night before using the fresh water from the lock. They're then used to make up the dip wash. And then at the end of the day, the spent dip wash goes back into those IBCs. And now we have the logistical challenge of getting rid of all of that spent dip wash because it's organophosphate. So we're having to work. SEPA have been, I have to say, a massive shout out to SEPA. They have been fantastic. We're very lucky to have such a good regulator in this country. And they've been really helpful in identifying license sites and then working to modify the licenses on those sites to extend the capacity where possible to make all of this actually feasible. But just to highlight the logistics in this operation, and that's one of between 4 and 6 stops every day. These guys have been doing 18-hour days for the last 10 days. So it is a phenomenal effort. You'll notice I'm here and not there because that is not my skill. So, yes.
I think your video might work as well.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Hi. Yeah, these are the last, if it does work, these are the last sheep going up onto the dipper. We don't have the sound, but you can almost hear the cheers from the people who have been working with it. And we've got a mobile handling system there, which means we can do gathering in the middle of nowhere as well, which makes it all just much more flexible. And they literally are the last sheep. So, yes. And then we go back again in 4 weeks and do it all again. So, yeah. Happy days.
But we're just really excited, and we felt that you kind of guys should be with us on this, so we thought we would just share these videos. And thank you very much. Oh, no. There we go. Right, so a bit more mundane things. We've been developing the DigiCroft, and I spoke to you, I think, was it the last conference? No, it was a meeting in between to Epic, to get your help to try and work out what kind of parameters we wanted to look at. We've also been speaking to the crofters to see how they could use this game. Again, the teams, myself and Malcolm, who's disappeared, but he's out with the touch table, he's been helping you. And then Dave and Bartley and Stu have been really helpful feeding into the progress of the game. I want to tell you about moving it from the Croft to the DigiFlock. I'll tell you about that. I'll tell you about the testing this summer, about the simulated environment, and about all the embedded things. So I'll talk to you for a bit. Because people have asked about the Shetland VT, I'll just show you how you can look at that, and then I'll give you a quick demonstration about the DigiCroft. Hopefully I won't bore you too much. So originally when we set out, we used a simulated environment called the DigiCroft, but the DigiCroft simulated environment was developed for a Horizon 2020 project called Desira, and we were getting confusion between the DigiCroft and what we would embed one with the embedded gaming. So we've decided, having consulted quite a few people, DigiFlock seems quite good. So from now on, we're going to be talking about the DigiFlock. That's the simulated environment with the embedded game, because we want to take everybody on board. And the other thing is we've got a whole load of digi tools. There's a banner outside about it. We're hoping in the future there might be a digi herd, which will be more about mixed farming and cattle. Yeah, so This summer we took the DigiFlock game. It was not the one that you're seeing now, it was the version before, and it was more of a draft version. We took it to the Highland show, we collected feedback. People from the general public, they said it was an interesting excitement development for gaming. We had a lot of people who were interested in gaming anyway. They came and had a play. We had farmers, they saw it as a great way to get you thinking about disease control and try out a few things. Thanks to the team who helped me at the Highland show, there was Malcolm, Orla, Stu and Monica. They helped, we had the big touch table was on the Hutton stand, but then we had a smaller version on the Morden stand, and what we were doing was we were trying to collaborate. If people were asking us a lot of information about disease control, then we sent them up to Morden. If Morden were getting people who were asking more about the kind of social aspects of it, they sent them down to us. So we were trying to have this kind of collaboration there. And we collected feedback from people. There were things that they didn't like, so we tried to work with those. There were things that they were suggested they wanted to see more of, so we tried to incorporate those. And we were just trying to raise awareness that we're developing this game and that hopefully it's going to be out there soon. So we've updated the background. We've tried to make the simulated environment look a bit more like a generic crofting area. We had too many trees before, apparently, so we've reduced the number of trees. We've made them more in little clumps. There's no big forests anymore because a lot of the crofters and the farmers said, don't be ridiculous. We can't possibly have that many. Apparently, my mountains are too pointy, so I might have to do something about that. We want people to be able to look at it and say, yes, I can see myself there, it looks real, and I'm engaged, I'm embedded, I want to immerse in this, I want to go and have a look. You can use all the different, you can walk around it, you can use a quad, you can go aerial, and the idea is that people are entertained by it, that they can engage with it, they can go and explore it, and then we hit them with the fact that they can also play a game. So we've got an embedded game there. You guys helped us decide on the new parameters. You said, let's have a look at biosecurity, so what biosecurity measures. You said that we should look at the health level of the animals, that there should be a community value, so have we socially engaged with the local communities, and then value, I mean, farmers are about economic production, so they need to know they're making money. In previous games, they've made lots of money, and the comments have been, this isn't realistic, they were making too much. Now they're a bit upset because they don't have enough money to keep going. But maybe we're actually getting somewhere now because you run out of money. We've put in some different sheep breeds, so because we're mainly looking at crofts, traditionally they used to have black faces. Some of them have come away from black faces and they've put North Country Cheviots in, and some of them are trying to go for more commercial, so they've got Texels. So those are the three breeds. We've tried to look at them in that maybe the black faces are more hardy, so they're more disease resistant, so they've got a different value, and maybe the Texels are quite soft, so they're more susceptible to disease. So we've been playing around those parameters. If you think we've got them wrong, please shout out, please tell me, because we can change all these things, and that's fine. We've embedded quite a lot of boosters, so all the boosters have different values, and again we can change these. So we've got things like the quarantine measures, so we've decided on a biosecurity level, health level. It doesn't really give much value to the community if you quarantine your animals, and it actually costs you some money because you've got to keep them isolated. Things like the virtual vet, that could be helpful to the biosecurity and the health level. It's not got any value to the community, or it doesn't cost anything. Decision-making tools, that might cost you money. So we're trying to put values on these different things. Again, we don't have a problem if you don't agree with us. Please come and tell us. We're happy to take this on board. These are all the ones that, boosters that we thought biosecurity measures that could be implemented. we've discussed these to a certain extent with some of the crofters. Some of them, they just go, no, we wouldn't ever use that, that's fine. These are some suggestions that Stu and Dave have come up with, some of the other farmers that have come up with, stakeholders have come up with. They've all got different values. Again, as I said, I'm more than happy if you say that they should have a higher value for cost, or it has less impact on the biosecurity or the health. We've actually got a table if you want to have a look at it. That's brilliant. We'll need your input. If you think there are some that we've got wrong that shouldn't be there, that you think, or something that you think is missing, then please shout and tell us. Yep. So today we've got the game available on the touch table, and there's quite a few people who've already had a look at it, but we've got another session after this. I think it's a poster session and lunch, so you come and have a chat to us if you want to. We're still open to suggestions of the parameter values. Major changes, we probably can't do anything for this iteration, but if you want to give me some more money, I'm more than happy to take those on board. And we're going to start getting the game out to the crofters and the farmers and getting their input. Not in EPIC, but in B3, which is our SRP piece of work. We've got this Annie Hub group, and we'll be asking them to feed in to it as well. This is the virtual tour that I was talking about that we've been putting together with the Shetland Health Livestock Marketing Group and Shetland Health Livestock Group. What's Hilary part of? I can't remember her name. I should not be happy. But we were due to take a group of stakeholders from Lewis and Harris up to Shetland. They'd heard about what they were doing in Shetland. They were really interested. Unfortunately, Logan Air cancelled all the flights on us, so we ended up in Shetland by ourselves. So we took some footage and we put together a virtual tour. And this is what I want to just show you. You can go and we can share the link with you. And if I share the link with you, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I have to shut down that one. Bear with me for 2 minutes. Do you guys need to turn off so that I can share my screen? Yeah. So what we do is we use a 360-degree camera to take images, and they look like this. And you can access it on a website, so you can go and have a look at it yourself. And we've embedded resources in there. These are the livestock containers that they use to take animals from Aberdeen onto the boat, and then they take them up to Shetland. And when they arrive in Shetland, they have a procedure, and it's called their livestock bookings procedure. And they need to email for the North Link Ferry, and this information then comes through to the people on the pier, and they arrange to have vets on hand. And I will just show you. They take the kind of crates off of the ferry, and they come here and they dock straight into their pens. And then the animals are offloaded. They have different sizes. Some of them are for the sheep, some of them are for the cattle, and they herd them down, lots of different crates. They herd them down into the pens, and they hold all the animals here, and that's only once they've been tested are people allowed to collect them. So they eventually take them inside. Yeah, they take them inside the building. And once they've been tested, once the Shetland vets have come and they've taken blood samples, then they're available for people to come and collect. But if it's sheep, you then have to take your sheep to the dipper. And this works really well for Shetland. It allows them to control everything that comes onto their island. Unfortunately for Lewis and Harris, is they have several ports, and they don't have any of these systems, so animals just come in on people's livestock trailers. So it's a case of what of these aspects could they take on board, could they use? And some of the animals, even though they've been tested, they still get held on people's farms in isolation. So this is a really nice farmer that we went to see. He's very proud of his sheepdog, that's why he wanted to show us. But his sheep are held there for another, I think, 2 to 6 weeks, depending on their results. So he's got these in isolation until he gets the all clear. And he has really good isolation fields. I don't know if you can see this, everybody's watching. There's a field here, and it's completely isolated. It's got stone walls all the way around. It's got roads, and he can put his animals in there, and he knows that nothing else can get anywhere near them. He's got another place that he uses as well. Unfortunately, when the snow turns up and when the waters rise, the animals can actually get out, and he's a bit disappointed about that. Anyway, anybody that is interested, I can give you this link, and there's lots more information on there that you can go and play with, and you can go and have a look, just in case that's something that's interesting to you. And then, that's disappointing. Carol, is Malcolm outside? I don't seem to have it on my full screen. Ah, no, it's okay, I've managed. Check me. So yeah, this is our virtual platform. So we've gone into quite a lot of trouble to make it look a bit more realistic, because there was a fair amount of criticism that it didn't look much like a croft to them, that it wasn't realistic enough, that they needed to be able to be more embedded. So as you can see, and you can move around, it's normal gaming keys that we use, and we can go aerial too. If we go up, then we can have a good look around. We've put roads in, we've got signposts to show people around, and it's looking really nice. And if we click on M, we get to go into the game. And this is what you can go and play with outside, and you can drag animals and put them in. And there's also all these different boosters. You can put up to 2 boosters on all the different fields. So this would be for fecal egg counts, if it's roundworm that's a problem. This is one of the isolation fields, and you put in all your parameters, you press play, and at the end of the year you look and see what effect you've had on your biosecurity, on your health level, your community, and your value. As I said, we've adjusted how much things cost, and people tend to run out of money, which they get quite upset about, which is getting a bit more realistic. So that's everything. Thank you.
Thank you. The graphic is very realistic. So, question?
SRUC, there's been quite a lot of emphasis earlier in the talks about the need for the control to be a collective and a community-led effort, or not necessarily led, but with strong community buy-in. Do you think that there would be any benefit of making this game sort of, I suppose, I don't know what the parlance is, but I imagine it's called multi-user, so that you've got several farmers, even a community of farmers, working together so that you're both showing the benefits of collective effort, but also hopefully encouraging it for the real world?
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I think that would be a really nice way to go. I'm hoping that what we'll do is we'll take the game with us when we go to do the workshops this year, and it would be good to hear people's thoughts on using it together, and maybe we could have a session of them playing it and they're you know, collectively doing it. So yeah, that's a really nice idea. Thank you.
Yeah, just wondering about using other forms of social media to get better outreach. So, you know, things like Twitch or YouTube. Have you sort of contemplated using those and, you know, taking people through a whole season, for example, in a shorter way to demonstrate how easy it can be to play with the game and interact with the game? Is that something you're thinking about doing?
So, no, we haven't. That's a really nice idea. And hopefully this is our next kind of plans, is that, you know, we're developing it at the moment. How do we get it out there? What's dissemination? But that's a nice idea, and I'll come back to you, Stu.
Any other question? No? So, thank you again, Claire. And it's 11:30, so our session ends here. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly learned a lot. So thanks you to all three presenters, and you can go get your coffee now.